The first sound I remember was the scrape of a chair leg across our kitchen floor. It was not loud, but in a quiet house at 5 in the morning it seemed to cut through everything. The stove was still cold. A skin of ice had formed along the lower corners of the window, and my wife stood with one hand on the back of that chair while I told her she would need to ask me before taking the buggy that week. She did not argue. She only looked at me for a long moment, then pulled the chair out and sat down. By Sunday, her place at that table was empty. What I had called obedience had cost me the trust of the woman who had given me her whole life, and I did not understand how much I had lost until I heard the silence she left behind. My name is Jonas. I am a husband, a father, and the head of a household in an old order Amish community. I share these stories because a man's mistakes can teach as much as his good decisions if he is willing to name them honestly. If you have ever had someone use faith, duty, or tradition to press you into something that did not feel right, tell me in the comments what helped you see it clearly. And if you value stories about Amish life told from inside the home, you are welcome to subscribe. This happened when my wife and I had already been married for 12 years. We were not young newlyweds trying to learn the shape of one another. We had 4 children then, the oldest 11 and the youngest not yet 3. We had buried one child between them. We had paid down most of the note on our farm. We knew how the other took coffee, which floorboard complained outside the bedroom, and how to pass each other in a narrow pantry without thinking about it. I believed that kind of familiarity meant our marriage was strong enough to bear anything. What I did not understand was that trust is not a beam you set once and forget. It is more like the fire in a cook stove. It must be tended, and a careless hand can smother it faster than you would think. The bishop came to see me on a Monday evening in late November. Rain had been falling since noon, thin and cold, and the lane was the color of black coffee. I had just finished bedding the horses. Straw clung to my wet boots, and the smell of leather and damp wool followed me into the workshop. He was waiting there beside my workbench. He had not come for a formal ministers' meeting. He said he wanted to speak man to man. I respected him. That matters to say, plainly. He had baptized me, stood with us when our little boy was buried, and helped organize men from 3 neighboring farms when a windstorm peeled half the roof from our barn. He was not a stranger pushing his way into my home. He was a man whose judgment I had trusted for years. That made what followed harder to recognize. He had heard, he said, that my wife had taken the buggy twice to help her younger sister without first checking whether I needed it. He had also heard that she kept the money from her egg sales in a separate envelope before entering it in our household book. Neither thing had troubled me. Her sister was carrying her first child and had been sick most mornings. The egg money paid for lamp oil, thread, school tablets, and small needs that should not require a meeting each time. My wife always showed me the account at the end of the month. We had lived that way for years. But standing in my workshop with rain tapping the tin roof and the bishop's black hat resting beside my plane, those ordinary arrangements were made to sound like cracks in the order of my home. He did not shout. He did not threaten me. He spoke quietly about responsibility, about a husband answering before God for his household, and about small liberties becoming larger ones when they were not examined. Then he asked me to test whether my wife would submit to my direction without resistance. It was to last 1 week. I was to change a few rules without explaining why and observe her response. I remember looking down at the curls of maple on the floor. One shaving had wrapped itself around the toe of my boot. Something in me resisted. I knew my wife was not a horse to be tested under a new harness. I knew our marriage was not a contest between command and refusal, but I also knew the shame a man can feel when another man suggests he is not leading his own house. Pride often enters wearing the coat of duty. That evening I put it on. I went home and said nothing about the conversation. That was the first wrong. Whatever else happened afterward grew from that concealment. My wife set a bowl of bean soup in front of me. Steam clouded my spectacles for a moment. The children were talking about a fox track they had found near the hen house, and our youngest was dropping pieces of bread into his milk. It was the kind of ordinary meal I now understand to be a gift. I watched my wife move between the stove and the table, and instead of seeing the woman who had worked beside me for 12 years, I began measuring her. Would she sit when I expected? Would she question me? Would she reach for the account book without permission? A test changes the person who gives it before it reveals anything about the person receiving it. I had turned from her husband into an observer, and she had not been told the rules. The next morning, I told her not to take the buggy to her sister's house. She said her sister had asked for help with washing, and that she had promised to be there by 9. I told her the answer was no. There was no work I needed the horse for. No weather danger, no child at home who required her. I gave no reason because the absence of a reason was part of the test. She studied my face, then untied her bonnet and hung it back on the peg. She did not defy me. She sent a note with a school child who passed our lane. The bishop would have called that obedience. What I saw, though I would not admit it then, was hurt. At supper, she was quiet. I told myself quietness was peace. Men can give fine names to the damage they do when the truth would require them to stop. On Wednesday, I asked for the egg money envelope. There were $18.40 inside. I counted it at the table, wrote the amount in the book, and put the envelope in my desk. She asked whether something had gone unpaid. I said no. She asked if I no longer trusted her with it. I said a husband should know what is under his roof. The words sounded strong when I spoke them. They were borrowed strength. I had not earned them through wisdom or need. I was using my position to create uncertainty and then treating her uncertainty as evidence. She folded a dish towel twice, though it was already folded, and placed it on the counter. That small movement remains clearer in my memory than many large events. Her hands needed something to do because I had made our kitchen feel unsafe. Thursday was the day I could have ended it. I went to the harness shop to deliver 2 repaired bridles. The bishop was there speaking with another man. He asked, away from the others, whether my wife had resisted. I said she had asked questions. He told me questions could be a way of moving the boundary a little at a time. Then he suggested one final instruction, something close enough to her heart that her response would show where her loyalty rested. Her parents held a family meal on Friday evenings during the colder months. They lived a little more than 3 miles away. Unless a child was ill or the roads were dangerous, we went. Her father had begun moving slowly after an accident with a corn picker, and those evenings mattered to her. I was to tell her we would stay home, again without giving a reason. I walked back from the shop carrying an empty bridal sack. Wet snow had begun to fall, and each flake disappeared when it struck the mud. Halfway home, I stopped beside a split-rail fence. I knew exactly what I was being asked to do. This was no longer guidance about order. It was a demand that I injure something good so another man could judge the sound she made. I wish I could tell you I turned around that moment and refused. I did not. I kept walking. That is the plain truth. At home, she was rolling dough. Flour lay across the table in a white oval, and a pot of chicken broth trembled on the stove. I told her we would not go to her parents' the next evening. She looked toward the calendar, even though she knew the day. She asked whether I had taken on extra work. I said no. She asked whether one of the children had done something wrong. I said no. Then she wiped both hands on her apron and asked what had changed in me since Monday. I told her nothing had changed. That was another lie, and she knew it. She had watched me become colder by the day. She had felt me examining every answer. A wife who has shared 12 years with a man knows when his silence is empty and when it is hiding something. She asked if someone had spoken to me about her. I could have told the truth. My mouth went dry. I heard the stove damper click as the iron warmed. I said only that I was responsible for the house and expected her to follow my decisions. She stood very still. Then she gave me the only sentence from that week that I can repeat exactly. You are asking me to disappear so you can feel like a husband. She went upstairs. I remained beside the table with the flour between us. I was angry at first, not because she was wrong, but because she had named the thing I was trying not to see. I cleaned the flour from the table with the side of my hand. I did it roughly, leaving streaks in the wood grain. For an hour I told myself she had failed the test. Then our oldest daughter came in for a drink of water and asked why Ma'am was packing a bag. The anger left me so quickly it felt like a door opening in winter. I climbed the stairs. My wife had placed 2 dresses, stockings, her Bible, and the children's Sunday clothes on the bed. She was not crying. That frightened me more than tears would have. She said she and the children would stay with her parents for a few days. I told her she could not take the children without discussing it with me. Even then, even with the consequence standing before me, I reached for control. She closed the bag and sat beside it. She told me the children could remain if I insisted, but she was leaving. That was when the test ended, though I had not yet found the courage to say so. The bishop wanted to know whether my wife would obey me. What I learned was that I had been willing to betray her trust in order to prove my authority to someone outside our marriage. She left before breakfast on Friday. Her brother came with a covered buggy. The temperature had dropped overnight, and the mud in the lane had frozen into hard ridges. The children stood in the doorway in their coats. Our youngest did not understand why I was not climbing in. My wife carried the bag on her lap. She looked straight ahead as the buggy turned toward the road. I watched until the black box disappeared behind the bare hedge. Then I went inside and found 5 bowls on the kitchen table. She had set out breakfast before leaving. That kindness broke what pride I had left. The house was quiet, but not peacefully quiet. A home has sounds you do not notice until the person making them is gone. The broom against the back step, a drawer shut with the hip, a hymn hummed under the breath while bread is kneaded. I heard none of those things. The clock ticked above the washstand. A coal settled in the stove. I sat in her chair and understood that I had not lost an argument. I had lost the place of safety I once held in her mind. That afternoon I went to the bishop. The sky was clear and sharp, and frozen ruts pulled at the buggy wheels. I told him what had happened. He asked whether she had left against my direction. I said yes, but then I told him the greater truth. She left because I had made my direction unworthy of trust. I had agreed to test her, but the test had exposed me. I said I would not bring the details of my marriage to him again, unless there was a real need for counsel, and my wife knew we were seeking it. I also said no one would ask me to provoke her obedience again. My voice shook. I wish it had not, but courage does not always sound steady. Sometimes it sounds like a frightened man finally telling the truth. He did not bless my decision. He did not argue for long either. He said I was acting from emotion and should take time. I told him I had already taken 4 days too many. I drove from there to my wife's parents' home. I did not go inside. I stood by the hitching rail with cold working through the soles of my boots and asked her father if she would speak with me. She came to the doorway but remained on the step. The children were somewhere inside. I could hear them running across the floor. I told her everything. I did not say the bishop made me do it. He had asked, but I had chosen. A grown man cannot hand his conscience to another person and then blame that person for what follows. I told her about the workshop, the egg money, the instruction concerning the buggy, and the reason I had tried to keep her from the family meal. I returned the $18.40. The envelope had softened at the corners from being in my coat pocket. I apologized, but an apology does not buy back trust like a return tool. It only names the debt. She listened. She did not come home that day. I drove back alone. For 13 days, she and the children stayed with her parents. I visited when she allowed it. I did chores for her father without using the work as a reason she should forgive me. I answered every question she asked. When I did not know why I had agreed so quickly, I said I did not know. Later, I understood more of it. I had confused being respected with being obeyed. I had been afraid that another man would think me weak. To escape that small shame, I had placed a much greater burden on my wife. On the 14th day, she returned with the children. That was not the end of the matter. It was the beginning of repair. For months, she asked before taking the buggy. Even after I told her she did not need to. Each time she asked, I heard the echo of what I had done. She kept the egg money in the same envelope, but the envelope stayed in an open crock on the pantry shelf where either of us could reach it. We began speaking on Saturday evenings after the children were in bed, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. We talked about the decisions that belonged to both of us, the responsibilities each of us carried, and the difference between leadership and domination. Those are not words we used often then, but they describe what we had to learn. I remained responsible for my household, but responsibility did not mean arranging everyone around my pride. It meant being the first to tell the truth, the first to accept the cost of a decision, and the first to protect the dignity of the people entrusted to my care. My wife did forgive me. Trust took longer. There were choices she brought to me that she once would have made freely, and I had to remind her that I wanted a partner with judgment, not a shadow waiting for permission. There were also moments when I felt the old defensiveness rise, especially if she questioned me in front of the children. I learned to ask whether my concern was about the decision itself or about how I imagined I looked. More often than I care to admit, it was the second. Years have passed since that week. The children are older now. The kitchen floor has been replaced, and the chair that scraped that morning was repaired twice before it finally split beyond saving. But I still remember the ice on the window and my wife's hand resting on the chair back. I remember how easily I used sacred words to defend an unsacred motive. Faith should make a man more truthful, more patient, and more willing to sacrifice himself for others. If it is making him secretive, proud, and eager to control, he should stop and examine whose will he is really serving. What I understand now is simple. A marriage cannot be strengthened by a hidden test. The moment you set a trap for the person beside you, you have stepped outside the trust you are trying to measure. Counsel can be wise. Tradition can carry wisdom. Authority can carry responsibility. But none of those things excuse a man from conscience, and none give him permission to turn his wife into evidence of his own strength. I lost her that week, even though she later came home. I lost the trust she had given me without fear. What returned was not the old trust. It was something rebuilt slowly, with truth, patience, and many ordinary choices. In some ways, it became stronger, but I would never call the breaking necessary. A scar may become strong skin, but that does not make the wound good. If there is one thing I want you to carry from my mistake, it is this. The people closest to you are not tests of your authority. They are souls placed within reach of your care. If someone asks you to prove your leadership by causing confusion, fear, or pain in your own home, the faithful answer may be no. And if you have already done harm, do not hide behind the person who advised you. Name your choice. Return what you took. Tell the truth without bargaining for forgiveness. Then be patient enough to let trust heal at the pace of the person you wounded. If you want more stories about marriage, fatherhood, work, faith, and the choices that shape an Amish home, subscribe and join me here. And I would like to ask you something specific. Where do you believe guidance ends and control begins? Leave your answer in the comments. I read more of them than you may think. New stories from my life will be here each week.